Are you ready for our first conversation? Okay. We're going back to church. We're going back to church today. Okay, for this first conversation, we are literally getting dirty. We're literally talking rubbish. Now, using waste as a resource is something our next host is passionate about. She's a podcaster and sustainable fashion consultant and wearing an amazing outfit today as well. Thanks, Sister Anna, no problem. But before you meet the brilliant Bianca Foley, watch this.
I'd always see allotments from the train on my way to school. I never really got why people would want one. Then I met my girlfriend and she had one, so I thought I'd give it a go. 2 years later, I'm obsessed. I come here whenever I can. And when I'm not, I'm thinking about it. We keep all our old food waste to make compost. Then we use it to grow new food. It's like magic, growing something new from something old. Things grow and then they go back to the soil. There's like no waste. Everything goes back in to make the next crop for the next season. It just keeps going round and round and round and round.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Reggie, for that very, very lovely intro. Wow. The idea of circularity, of things going around and around, nature knows what it's doing. Food waste, compost, for example, that's just the perfect example of it. Nature has the clues of how our capitalist economy could operate, how we can use a limited number of materials that go around and around, instead of taking more, making more, and throwing more away. What other learnings from nature can we apply to the fashion industry? So that leads me very nicely into our first panel today. I'd like to introduce my first set of panelists. So joining Anne-Laure will be Izzy Manuel, Martine van Eersel, Bruno Langlois, Romain Girard. I'd like to make your way up onto the stage, guys. Thank you. So yeah, thanks for joining me, everyone. I didn't actually properly introduce everybody, so I'll just go through their names very quickly again. So next to me is Izzy Manuel, who is a next-gen thinker. We've got Anne-Laure, Puma's Chief Sourcing Officer, Martine van Eersel, Manager Business Development and Materials at Ortessa, Bruno Langlois, who is the Business Development and Partnerships Manager at Carbios, and Romain Girard, who is the Senior Head of Innovation. So thanks, guys. We talk a hell of a lot about circularity, and we saw a setup to this intro in the intro video. But before we dive in and talk further with our panelists today, I think it would be really helpful for us to look at one of Puma's latest examples in biodegradability, which is incredibly hard to say for some reason, SUEDE.
This is Puma SUEDE, an experiment in biodegradability. It starts with the iconic suede. Every aspect of this sneaker has been rethought. The upper, the sole, the liner, every single stitch. To be more sustainable and to be fully biodegradable. 500 Puma fans are beta testing the SUEDEs today. They're wearing, loving, and sharing their SUEDE experience. 6 months in, they'll return their worn SUEDEs to Puma. Biodegradation begins, turning SUEDEs into compost for crops. So, how does Puma evolve? How can our industry benefit? How can we all get one step closer to circularity?
It's a new opportunity for us to make a positive impact on the future.
It's about creating footwear that's loved by the Mavericks and the planet. There's only one forever. Let's make it better.
That's fantastic. So if you are watching at home, please join in and send us your questions using the hashtag PUMA COP. So let's get into the panel. So I'm going to direct the first question to Anne-Laure. What's the biggest challenge when recycling footwear, in your opinion?
No.
You're going to have to project.
Let's try. OK, it's working now. I think the biggest challenge in footwear is the issue of
of components in a shoe. You have to bring together many components and glue them together. So how you biodegrade something so complicated can be really a challenge. So that's the biggest hurdle we have right now in footwear.
Definitely. What are you kind of tackling? What are you doing to tackle the issue, to be fair? Like, Romain, Anne, could you guys kind of elaborate on that a little bit?
I think we had to tackle the issue, to tackle the challenge. We had to rethink the way we approach product. And specifically, next to the challenge that Anne-Laure mentioned, there is one key challenge is also the pace of what we do. We cannot wait 10 years or X amount of time to move the needle, but we need to move on that topic at the right pace and at a fast pace. So when we set up to that challenge to turn a shoe back to earth, and not from a product to a product, but from a product to earth, to us it was very important that we are moving this with the right pace. And in a standard process of innovation, with such a complexity of a topic, you would segment and fragment your approach and look at something linear. So you would set up the material, make sure they are passing the right standards, move on to the full shoe, make sure they are doing, and so on and so forth and so on, which leads you to a certain amount of time. In that process, we only took care of the core and the base, the material, making sure we find the right partner to be able to understand, and then basically open completely the doors, as well as with the consumer, to really understand at once, not in a linear way, to understand at once how the product behaves and what the product does, and does it match what we were envisioning. So it's a very different approach of looking at creating product, which is much more based on being experimental and moving away from trying to have something perfect, but rather emphasize the fact that we do things in the right direction, and perfection might never happen, or will come along the way.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely a journey, and there's so many parts that are moving with it. I mean, I know you've got thoughts on this, so if you do want to jump in.
I think it's really interesting because obviously your point was saying that the consumer obviously needs to change their perspective on waste, which I totally agree. Like what we're, activists online in the sustainable fashion world, we're always trying to tell people, circularity, shop secondhand, reduce your waste, don't throw your clothes to landfill because they just sit there for thousands of years. But I think the problem is from a consumer's perspective, we really struggle to find ways that we can actually sustainably reduce our waste. And that means, it's really impossible to recycle clothes. Like there aren't many firms that I could just send a bag of old clothes that aren't worth anything to be recycled. And I think that's where brands obviously need to start thinking beyond the consumer and think about what they can do in the immediate, like reducing their waste, reducing overproduction. 30% of clothes every season aren't actually sold. So what happens to that? That's a really, we need to be reducing consumption, but not just from a consumer perspective, but also from a brand perspective.
Well, if I can take the topic of the re-jersey, we've been exploring and now scaling up the capability to use waste as a resource. So I'm not sure you guys how familiar you are with this experiment we've done on the re-jersey, taking old jerseys to transform them back into new jerseys. As a matter of fact, I was in Spain last week to visit our partners, the waste collection company and the chemical company and the yarn company who make that process feasible, where you use basically old T-shirts that you shred and transform back into polyester, so you do a new T-shirt. This is a technology actually that has been developed, I would say probably 10 years ago, but that was commercially not viable 10 years ago, that now becomes commercially viable. And I'm very hopeful, and we talked about it also with Colleen, and looking at the industry as a whole, that from a waste perspective, we look at waste as a resource to make sure that the circular process can really become reality. We have an ambition at PUMA next year to produce at least 500,000 T-shirts, using old T-shirts to make new T-shirts, and really ramping up that to a few million units in the really close futures. We're building the capability in Europe. We're looking at building the capability in Asia as well. And I think as an industry, and we're collaborating with the brands and the other stakeholders we have, from waste collection to yarn suppliers to garment makers, to make it feasible and realistic. So this was, for me, being a veteran of the industry. I've been in this industry for very long. If I look at 2022, this has been really a year where I get some hope that, to your point, the overproduction, the reusing of the waste we are creating as a consumer, there is now some possibilities, at least in certain categories like polyester, that we can make use of old waste to become new garments, and that is a never-ending process. Now, the other big piece for us, and I think for the entire industry, is really about collaboration, and we have key partners here from a chemical industry that are helping to really create this innovation where using the waste as a resource will become a reality beyond polyester. So maybe my friend from Carbios can speak here.
For this, pass on my message. So I just want to add that you're very helpful, and it started with simple materials, and now we are developing technology even for more complex materials. It's true that for the comfort, we like mixture of textile, mixture of fibers. So in the nature, we also produce a lot of complex materials. I mean, a tree is made of cellulosic, but it's all kinds of nature. And inspired by nature, we are basically re-engineering these organisms, which are able to break down materials to simple bricks. And that's what Carbios technology is about, is to break down the fibers of polyesters, even if it's mixed with other materials. So you can take all the bricks and then remake fiber. This is the new adventure, and this is what we are trying also to do. And to be credible, we want also to scale it up. We use a lot of materials. I mean, I'd like to give just one number. The textile industry is using 50 million tons of polyester fibers altogether. So we need to think of technology that are capable of handling this huge amount of materials.
No, that's fantastic. And going back to your point on collaboration, I know that obviously you guys are working together with Ortessa on the re-SUEDE process. So for Martine, I wanted to know, what did you discover during that kind of re-SUEDE process? And I guess acting as a partner with PUMA?
Yeah, well, what we discovered with investigating the biodegradability of the materials is that all materials that are used biodegrade, but the shoe as a whole and all the materials have different ways of biodegradation and different timing. And by that, we are now looking into how can we fit it into a normal process of a normal operating composting plant. And looking at the re-SUEDE shoe and the materials, we saw that there is a need for some pre-treatment. And we see that you still need an industrial bio-composting plant to really make it a compost again. So you can't take the shoe, put it in your garden, and watch half a year later, where's the shoe gone? That's not happening.
If only.
It really takes a lot of effort.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that, because there's been products that we've seen innovation over the past however many years where there are claims where they're completely biodegradable, and they've actually made that claim that you could put it in your flower bed at home and it will compost in a couple of years. And I'm thinking to myself, how on earth is that possible? So I'm glad that you clarified that. A question for Bruno, more so on the recycling side of things. So what recycling innovation is exciting you the most at the moment, or what sort of bio-recycling are you most hopeful about for the future?
Well, hopeful because, as I said, we are looking at nature. We know nature is capable of producing this, what I will call molecular scissors, so this kind of little mechanism to break down materials and get back to the raw materials. So we have engineered an enzyme to do this for the polyester. We are hopefully looking at other materials to degrade. I mean, we started with the big one. The polyester is big in the industry. This is also what is important is that in this circular model, we need to create, everybody is responsible. So we need to have people taking care of their waste, not looking at them as something that they want to get rid as quickly as possible and end it up in the wrong place. We really want to make sure that when you have something, you say, well, it's raw material, it's a future. What I have in my hands is a future T-shirts. I don't like it anymore. It's faded. It's full of holes. I don't like it anymore. They change the color and so on. But it's raw material. This is something you can collect and you can put in the right place so that we can transform it back into a new material, something that will have a new future. And this is something we can do with this technology.
No, definitely. It's interesting to see where waste could be heading. Have any of you seen any other innovations or exciting new ways that we can use waste?
I think if I can add, sorry.
Yeah.
One thing I want to add here,
Yeah, sure.
because it's a conversation, sorry. Do that.
Jump on it.
But one of the challenges we have today is the waste collection and how we use that waste collection, put that into the new flow. I think we're building the technology, but we know that collectively we need to get that waste collection organized and structured so that waste collection becomes a resource. We're making progress there. There are multiple conversations happening as we speak.
Yeah.
But we know this is this feedstock of waste that's going to create the new resources of the future. So there will be more collaboration, more work to be done within the countries, within the industries, within the brands to make sure that we look at it from a collective standpoint and just from a brand standpoint. So this is, I mean, when I was in Spain, I was really amazed by the partner we have and the building also technologies to sort out the waste when the waste is coming through. So you see there are new industries, new jobs, new business being built around that concept of using waste as a resource, which I really believe it's a fantastic, fantastic initiative.
I mean, I know that, so for example, 22 billion pairs of shoes get thrown away every single year, which is, you know, just under 3 times the world's population, which I think is absolutely insane. Yeah. And I just wanted to know, like, how as a brand can you ensure, let's say, if you've got the technology to collect everyone's shoes and recycle it, that it actually does happen? Because I've been reached out by other shoe companies saying, you know, we want to recycle your shoes, we'll take them in and give them a new lease of life. But they never actually said what they do to those shoes. You know, the Atacama Desert in Chile is literally being filled up with stuff that is just fast fashion waste. And how can, as a brand, and not just PUMA, but other brands in the industry, ensure that, you know, the stuff that you are claiming to be recycled and are getting recycled, how can you prove that? And how can we as consumers know that you are actually going to do that?
That's a very important question, not just for recycle, by the way, but for the entire supply chain. There is a need today to prove what you're doing is exactly what you're saying. So on recycle particularly, and we have textile exchange later in one panel that's going to explain how we're building standard and process to validate the claim that something is really recycled. Because to your point, there could be a lot of cheating.
Transparency, essentially, in the industry.
And it's a key element. And there's a lot of work being done today to make sure that we can build the right system that collect the data, which is a true data, to validate the claim. And you're very right in pointing out that we need to make sure that what we say is really what we do. Now, going back into footwear, collecting the waste and reusing the waste in footwear, to be honest with you, there will be much more work to be done, and we have the SUEDE initiative at the moment to understand how to biodegrade a shoe. Apparel is easier than footwear. I think footwear would probably take more time. And
there's so many components.
Yes.
There's so many different pieces, different fabrics, fibers,
yes,
make up one piece of footwear, that it is going to take a long time to work out those innovations. And I think
but we need to go quick, and that's why the industry collaboration here is so critical, you know, not just from a brand perspective, but also from the supplier perspective and from the technology perspective. So we're all together, we join forces to find solutions.
Yeah.
To my friend's Romain's point, there is an emergency. We know, we feel it, and that's why we're having this kind of conference today to bring everybody and get support.
Yeah, just taking it back, and I'll ask that question again then. So Bruno, what recycling innovation are you most excited about at the moment?
The most exciting recycling? When I look at some technologies today in terms of recycling, it's the capability to transform something that has no value in our mind, a waste, into something that can be like a brand new materials, you know? Today we are capable in our labs and working at large scales to take a T-shirt and make it a new packaging for food. So you would think that you can transform the industry like it's a raw materials, it's an old T-shirt, you think it has no value, and tomorrow you can make a fresh material out of that. That's what really appealed me. We also worked on an enzyme where you could basically degrade material in a home garden, in a home composter. For small objects, this has value. You know, if you take a tea bag or a coffee pots, the fact that it has already a lot of organic content, because the tea or the coffee, and just the thin layer around it that is useful to use the pod or the tea bags, can biodegrade now in 20 days, and you get the whole organic contents released. So for these kind of small objects, it's quite interesting as well.
Yeah, I think the key takeaway from what you're saying for me is that innovation is key, and then waste really isn't waste, it's a resource.
Exactly.
It's something that we can always use. So
yeah. It's a key takeaway for today. Don't look at your garbage as something that has no life. I mean, look at your waste and say they are value. They are organic. They can go to make compost. There are other materials. The ultimate waste, actually, should be shrinking as we speak, and almost become nothing in the future.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree with you. So a question for my little Instagram pal here, Izzy. You speak a lot about the importance of transparency in ethical fashion. Without us going into a lengthy discourse on this, which we can, why do you believe it's so important?
I think because consumers in general feel like we're constantly not getting the truth. You know, we see all these claims of, you know, this is a new conscious collection, this is a new green collection, we're being sustainable. But then actually, if you look at it, 1% of that garment or product is made from recycled plastic, and 1% out of a whole product is absolutely nothing. And obviously, there is a climate crisis. We can't lie about that there is a problem, and that, you know, we do need to do something about it. And I think transparency is so key. Like, you know, Fashion Revolution have facts that say that, you know, most brands do not share their production numbers. Like, could one of you come up with how many things you're making each year? Because I think this is the key thing.
We do communicate. We do put that on the annual report every year. The amount of cotton or polyester or every fiber we're using, everything is transparent. We name our suppliers, tier 1 and tier 2s. We're completely transparent on that. Completely. And trust me, it's a very thick report. I don't know how many pages. I have to read it myself. It's a lot of information. Whenever we've been asked, we're very happy to answer.
I think the issue is people aren't going to, you know, I'm not going to go through a 200-page report, because that's quite difficult as a consumer to read. And, you know, from a scientific perspective, the jargon used in a lot of these annual reports are actually quite confusing. And a lot of people go like, oh, I don't know what that actually means. And I think when you look at sustainability pages on most like brands' websites, they are just saying like, you know, not necessarily PUMA, but some brands just say like, we care about the garment workers, we are using sustainable materials, but don't necessarily say exactly how and why. And I think that transparency is so important for consumers to feel confident with who they buy with, basically.
I think you have a very valid point. I think transparency is key. But at the same time, you know, the industry is a very fragmented industry with multiple layers, multiple people. I'll give you just one example. One style, one purchase order. Do you know how many data? 1,000.
Not
1,000 data. So because there are so many data and so many stages in the way the industry functions, unfortunately, there is an effort to learn. And I can tell you myself, I had to learn a lot on that, especially on sustainability, because of the complexity. It operates from a field to a finished product and to the consumer. So yes, we are an open book and we share a lot of information, but I'm afraid a little bit of education and knowledge has to be there. Mm-hmm. So yeah, this is, I mean, you know, I'm happy to train anyone or to exchange with anyone on this kind of topic, but the reality is, from the very beginning, from the product to the end, it's a lot of information.
I think it's just making it easy for consumers to understand what the information is, and just so they don't have to actually search for it. I think, you know, I spend a lot of time literally going through loads of different things on the internet, trying to find little details of, you know, garment workers and stuff. And it shouldn't be that difficult, because if it is that difficult, I feel consumers feel like there's something that's hidden there. There's some, like, you know, hidden information that they can't get. And I think just making stuff so easy to understand and just, you know, there rather than in a 200-page booklet, which is quite difficult for, you know, people don't have the time to read that either.
Well, I invite you to go through the website with me.
Just on that point, actually, I'm going to go a little bit rogue, and I'm going to put it to the audience and say, just as a rough show of hands, do you guys feel like you understand the terminology used? Do you feel confident making a decision where you would shop based on terms like green, conscious, ethical, sustainable? Those of you who kind of feel like that you'd be confident, could you raise your hands for me? That's barely anyone here. And I think that kind of goes to show that there's validity on both sides of that argument, that the majority of consumers really wouldn't have an idea as to what each of these terms mean. But at the same time, there is part on the brands and the powers that be to make it more easy for people to understand, but at the same time, for those consumers who want to understand, to take the time and educate themselves about those things. So I think people need to meet in the middle. Maybe that's just
for
me.
sure.
But yeah. Anyway, thanks for that, guys. I appreciate it. So let's go back onto our kind of scripted questions for a bit. What are your kind of approaches to products afterlife then, Romain?
So what did change in the approach in general afterlife? I mean, afterlife of product used to be not only in PUMA, in our business, an afterthought. So that means you would create a product based on performance or based on a certain aesthetic. And then when the product is out there, maybe you would think, oh, what do we do with the used product? I think the last decade it showed that this approach now needs to be much more embedded in the conception of the product, or even more extreme, like on the SUEDE and some other maybe experiment that we're going to do in the next year, needs to be even the start of building a new product. So there's been a big shift into this from an afterthought to being whether a starting point or deeply embedded into the conception of the product those days.
Afterlife of a product has always kind of been an afterthought, as you said, and I've seen such a change over the past sort of 5 years how brands are thinking about this, and this is maybe something for the next panel that we'll be talking about, but I want to personally see more brands shouting about the good things that they do, the things where you offer buyback schemes, you offer recycling schemes, you offer mending as part of, or like a lifetime guarantee within a product, and seeing brands really, really shouting about that, because I feel like that in itself is it's a big step towards lowering people's consumption. I mean, how do you guys feel about those sort of things in terms of offering those kind of schemes?
Well, you need to offer this because we're talking about waste as a resource, but in first, resource becomes a waste because you have an end-of-life product that's full resources and you throw it away carelessly into a bin together with all other resources, and then it becomes a waste. So us all as people are making resources into waste just by not caring what happens after we have thrown it away. So by introducing take-back schemes, targeting certain resources before they become waste, then the innovation push isn't that big needed, because you have a good shoe that can be composted. You have a good T-shirt that can be recycled, and not a T-shirt full with yogurt because it's been in a waste truck. That's hard to be recycled, where innovation money is needed to get it as a resource. So I think evolving into take-back schemes, other business models will push the technology innovation because the commercial viable ones will be reached earlier.
Yeah, definitely agree with you. Are there any other sort of points of circularity that we can begin to include in the supply chain, I guess from conception and design before it hits creation?
Production waste in general. Like what happens to production waste? Can you literally use suede cut-offs and turn them into new suede, or etc.? Before it even hits a consumer, there are things that brands can then do to reduce waste in general by recycling the stuff that would end up in landfill in production.
So it's happening already. In the apparel world, it's happening already. The suppliers are collecting the waste and transform that back into a new resource. That is happening in cotton, it's happening in polyester already. So this is something that we all understood as a value, because again, it's a resource, so we don't want to lose the resource. So
and there's a cost associated with that as well.
For sure, yeah. So it's happening in China, it's building up in Vietnam, it's happening in Bangladesh. We have a Bangladesh partner here. We talk about cotton, so we really everybody's trying very hard to avoid that to end up as landfill, trust me. But on footwear, for sure, I mean, something probably a little bit more new, and Romain can talk about it, where the awareness in footwear is now being built, and we know we have to work on options and solutions and make sure that the supply chain collectively activates innovation and ways to use, to your point, to use the pre-consumer waste to make use of it. That's reality. That's true.
Could you just...
Romain, you want to add something?
Sorry, I was just going to ask, just before you continue, could you just explain to the audience what pre-consumer waste is, please?
So basically, when you do a product, you get the fabric. If I look on the apparel as an example, you cut the fabric, and not entire piece of fabric will be used to make a garment. Mm-hmm. Some of that will be not used because you don't use everything. So that usually in the past was collected and thrown away. Mm-hmm. What's happening today is that we keep all this waste from the fabric, and we send it to chemical recycling to bring that back into a yarn. So this is happening in polyester, and in cotton, we use the leftover from cotton on the light fabric. The color one is more tricky, we can't really use it, but on the light color, we use the cotton wastage that we put it back into the yarn. And today we have, on the PUMA example, on cotton, we are able to use about 25%. In 100% cotton, 25% can be coming from the waste from production. Okay. So there are activities there. We're trying to gain knowledge and to get the technology to help us to make the fabric as good as possible using the waste. It's more challenging on cotton. It's much easier on synthetic.
So is the aim to have 100% waste into, like, to recycle 100% of post-consumer waste?
Well, that's money, you know, at the end of the day. It's for everybody. So we want, definitely we want.
Yeah, perfect. Sorry to interrupt. Did you want to carry on?
No, I think on footwear, you know, of course, there is another complexity, as we were discussing at the beginning. The product by itself is made of much more different, or many different materials that have very different properties, and we need to respect this. I think one of the challenges also for us is, and I think for the consumer, we don't want to lower the quality of the product. We don't want to lower the performance of the product. We don't want to lower the comfort of the product. So it's also, as much as we want to move the needle, we have to find the right balance where it still connect with the consumer. We are experimenting a lot at the moment in terms of foam. There is definitely a new process where there is a lot of this waste that is generated, or the waste that is generated when building the product, can be reused without losing the properties and so forth. So there is, there is more opportunities in that field, but the complexity of the product actually forces us to really look at this through a lens of innovation. I think, especially in footwear, we came to an era where, you know, trying to just improve will not be enough if we really want to move the needle. We have to look at new tracks, we have to open new streams, and we have to open the conversation also very early from the beginning. I think part of opening also that conversation at the beginning is it helps also to bring awareness, because as a brand building product, we can only go as far as, you know, reaching the consumer and so forth, but taking back the product or doing the right move from the consumer point of view, there is a moment where, you know, it has to come from both sides. And so opening that conversation and that dialogue helps to share that understanding in a less official way also. Something that is way easier to understand.
You're right. I think the message there is that it's a fine balance. We've got to find that balance between not compromising on quality and product, but also not having the impact that we've had for however many years. So moving on to our last question, before we move on to our Q&A from the audience and those at home. Coming back to you, Izzy, what change can people make today that will make a true and lasting impact?
I think just thinking about if you're going to buy something new, are you actually going to wear it? Is it just going to sit in your wardrobe for years on end and do nothing? Because that is just wasting raw materials for no good reason. I just think thinking about how often you're going to wear a product, and if you're actually going to wear it, and if you actually need it, because if you don't need it, then why buy it? We're in this world of overconsumption because we're so used to just being able to pick up that one thing or buy that t-shirt because we might want it for that one event. But that whole one wear for one event is just so, like, it just really promotes overconsumption. So I think just thinking about how often you're going to wear something and if you actually need it and if you're actually going to use it a lot is my main take home.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks. I mean, I know I said that was the last question, and I know you are our Gen Z thinker, but has anybody else got any points on that? What can people do to make a long-lasting change?
I think the dialogue, exchanging ideas and really challenge each other like we're doing right now is honestly what helps everybody to get to the next level. So we have a panel here which is made of highly technical people and consumer, and I think bringing two sides or different sides together is absolutely critical.
That's a really fair point. I totally agree.
I think also that those conversations have also a couple of kids and then different age also. I think opening that conversation also changed the mindset. Like recently, our young teenager is looking for some T-shirt. Like instead of going online and looking at certain aspects, actually he look at my wardrobe and see what I'm not wearing. And that's where you see that some of the conversations in the families as individuals, but some of the conversation when we are opening these between brands and consumer, we're able to adjust or to evolve the mindset of the people, and I think that's very interesting to see.
I like the fact that you said that. Something that I've spoken about a lot on my podcast is the fact that I tend to shop my mum's wardrobe. About 50% of what I own comes from my mum's wardrobe. She's much older than me. I'm in my 30s, so I know that it might not necessarily have been in style when I was like 20, but I loved it all the same. Shop your mum and dad's wardrobes, that's what you need to do.
I can relate to that for sure.
I do relate to that too, because my daughter is still in my wardrobe.
It's a thing.
We were on the same side.
So I'm going to wrap it up. But if you would like to ask a question in the audience, we're going to take it old school and take it to church, as Reggie said. So please raise your hand and somebody will bring a mic over to you. But first of all, I'm going to dive to a question from Slido. This is a question to all of the panelists. Can Puma help to take back and recycle shoes from their retailers? Whoever wants to jump in, go for that.
We'll have to do it. I mean, the regulator will force us to do it anyway, so that's something which is in the agenda. So taking back is something that needs to get organized, not just Puma alone, but I spoke with Colin earlier. We know as brands, we need to collectively find a way to organize a good take-back scheme, which is not Puma specific, but multi-brand specific.
You're not currently doing it, are you?
We do.
Oh, you do?
We started to do, yes. We started to have some take-back scheme, but that's something we need to expand, yes.
And is that something that you'll be doing within your third-party retailers as well?
We'll have to. I mean, I don't think there will be any other options.
So,
I mean, retailers make up 13 million tons of textile waste, so as you said, it needs to be done, otherwise just more stuff ends up in landfill.
Well, the guys we have in Spain who does the collection of waste, basically we use the waste from this guy, which is not Puma product. It's multiple retailers' product. It doesn't really matter when we take the waste from him. You know, it could be an Inditex waste, could be mango, could be whatever. It doesn't have to be specifically Puma.
I think it's admirable, though, because a lot of companies I've seen that do a take-back scheme say it has to be specific to our product, which I think is, as you said, it shouldn't be like that.
No, of course not. It's, whatever is available is a resource anyway.
So exactly.
Let's use it. It doesn't matter.
It's
Puma,
the same
non
material.
It doesn't really matter. Yes.
All waste is a resource. Everything can be used.
It's the same material to start with. I mean, only the design is appealing, but the rest, the polyester, whichever part of industry, it's always coming. It's the same material. So.
Exactly. Have we got any questions in the audience? If anybody wants to ask, please raise your hand, and we'll go. Do you want to? We'll come to the lady in the leopard print first. You want to go? If there's, or whoever you want to go to first, I'll ask them.
Thank you so much. Puma seems to be doing such great things for like waste and rethinking waste and everything like that, but what was like the first step you took? Because obviously like a lot of these things are maybe for smaller brands are like out of the question right now, financially, resourcefully, but like what was the first step that you took when thinking about rethinking waste and how you're going to reduce your waste?
Wow. Honestly, I mean, to be very transparent with you, this project we had on Re-Jersey, Refiber, came from a French brand who we got to know that they were doing these kind of things, and that basically, triggered something in our mind, say, why not doing the same? Why not trying that? So basically, again, it's going back to this collaboration, this openness, because we don't have the truth, we don't have, alone we're never going to make it happen. So we need a collective effort from everybody. And there are super niche brands that are really dedicated to these topics, that are from whom we can learn a lot. So it's basically reaching out, being open, talking to people. You know, it could be informal meeting today where somebody I don't know will come with an idea and then it's going to trigger. So I think it's really a lot about this conversation, collaboration, being curious, being open. Our suppliers are fantastic people, and some of them have built their own vision into sustainability, the material supplier, the garment supplier. So we have this constant conversation, what can we do better collectively? So it's a lot about being curious, being open, and really encourage this innovation to happen. So yeah, it's a collaboration.
It's a collaboration, and it's also making sure we act. So there is a lot of things you can have on paper and you know, theorize. So okay, but I think our force and our power in a brand like our size is we are able to, you know, to try things and really like learn the reality of what it does and how it works. And I think, yeah, that's a big lever of making sure that we are taking a step into really action.
Yeah.
And to just to add on top of it, again, I have 3 Gen Z at home, and trust me, they push me very, very hard. No, seriously, this is and their friends are the same people saying to me, you guys need to do something. So we had the power to try, and to Romain's, you know, to echo what Romain is saying, we try. And then it works, it doesn't, but at least every time we learn and we bring more people into the conversation. So we need you guys. You're helping us.
That's the last thing is really like innovation. Perfection is the enemy of innovation, and that's really on those type of projects, we really embody that mindset. So we really, like, there is no failure. There can only be a positive by doing this. Yes, maybe we burn some money somewhere, okay, good, but there was a learning that, you know, will move the needle maybe in a year, maybe in 2 years. So, and I think we are really living this and embodying this in the company.
I think there is also one dimension probably which is introduced in many industries, including the textile industry, is to design materials, to design clothing for their end of life. We used to design materials because they will be economic, or we will maximize the value from our own segments. Now we need to think that the whole value chain, including the end of life of products, has to be thought with the right design at the beginning. How do I make my raw materials? How do I generate the end of life for my products? And that's probably a new dimension for the industry.
Yes, very true.
Okay. So we've got time for one more question. I'll take another one to the audience. Lady over there. Hi.
Thanks. Hi. I'm a journalist here, just kind of reporting on this, but I had a question about the SUEDEs. I'm wearing those right now. The whole period of it being 6 months until it's sent back, do you plan to extend that period? Because at the moment, if you see 6 months, you're returning that doesn't seem like that's quite the life cycle that you want from a shoe. I'd rather get a shoe that lasts quite a long time. So I'm just wondering if this is just a trial or if you plan to make that life cycle as long as it can be until you then return it to be made into something else.
So again, it's an experiment. We are learning. We define those 6 months as a certain base for us to get the right amount of data and understanding. The beauty in that project is actually kind of the time will not matter, because the idea of turning the product into soil, and actually soil on the first read that we are having, soil that has a grade A level, that means soil that can go to farmers, it kind of therefore doesn't matter what would be, the life cycle of the product. I think, because you touch also the time span, I think on that project we might even discover or learn that we might need to rethink the business model of buying or accessing those products over time. And then therefore, again, the timing aspect has no relevance anymore.
On a side note, how do you deal with microplastics and biodegradability? Like, are all the products that, if you decide to make them biodegradable, got to be technically plastic-free? Because obviously there's an issue around microplastics in clothing, microplastics in compostability, biodegradability. Like, how as a brand or as an industry is that being handled?
I mean, that's on the microplastic. That's where we are going, to expert. And I want to highlight this because we didn't have the chance. But this is the reality also that we all have to be aware. When we started this project, of course, working with a biodegradable partner or someone that is working in that area is key. We reach out to all the people in Germany and across Europe. This was the only partner that was, daring to also invest and engage and support us in trying things, and so learning on this. So I just want to highlight on the side, so where sometimes the complexity in this topic is actually not on the product, but is on all the rest of the process. But then to that specific question, I think we've got now more learnings as we are going through the projects, and then
microplastics is always it's always a big issue and a problem. When we make compost out of green household waste and together with the reissue or bio-based products, the compost we make is being tested on physical properties, chemical properties, but also is being tested on the amount of glass, stones, and plastics that are found. And it's not make a batch, do a test. It's a continuous sampling. Every month, an analysis, and by that analysis, you'll get your A, B, or C grade compost to sell. And plastics, the amount of plastics in your product is one of the analyzed items. So it's being taken care of, but if you really go to really microplastics, that's an endless discussion. You're a chemist, you know this. 100% efficient processes, they don't exist.
No, it's impossible.
No. So
impossible.
eradicating microplastics is a fable.
Yeah.
But you must do anything you can do to make sure that you don't introduce plastics that aren't degradable or can't be used to improve soil into the nature. Yeah. That's where you should focus now on. And perhaps over 10 years we can have a 100% efficient process. We can have no microplastics. But if you don't take the first step, you will never end up anywhere.
So it's down to the materials that are used to make a product rather than...
And we need, again, back to this, we need to learn, because actually on this, there is no standards.
Yeah.
No.
We are also pioneering here. Nothing is existing here. When we started to also on that project, we wanted to understand the only standards we had were on the packaging.
Definitely.
Which has nothing to do with this type of product. So that's, it's a very valid question, but we can only say that we're going to figure that out with the time.
Yeah.
And we're going to get there.
Okay. Thank you all so much. We're going to wrap it up there. So if you could all give our wonderful panelists a round of applause. Thank you.